Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about the 3 things that every succession plan needs. Now, before we talk about the 3 things, I do want to make sure that we're all aware that the succession plan actually has 6 components, but today we're just going to be talking about the 3 that are most overlooked when people are putting their succession plan together. So, as a reminder, succession planning is more than just the transition of ownership. So when we're thinking about the things that must transition, we've got ownership, management, and then we've also got the component of governance. So we're going to be talking about 3 components today: business planning, management operating systems, and continuity planning. Each of these 3 components are really important. They're primarily put in place to support the management transition, and that's often a thing that's overlooked when we talk about succession planning. So first, let's talk about why business planning is so important. It's often overlooked as a component of succession planning because most operations do some form of business planning as just part of their yearly habits around managing their operations. But one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that for succession planning to be successful, oftentimes the operation needs to expand and it has to stay viable because it's going to be supporting additional families or maybe additional people. So the business plan is what helps to ensure that all the generations that are currently working in the operation are all on the same page. So as we know, succession planning, one of the things that we have to be mindful about is the disharmony and disagreements that often occur when multiple generations are trying to make decisions together about the future of the operation. Business planning, one of the key components of it is setting the vision for your operation. And this should be something that everyone who is spending time working in the operation agrees that that is where we are working toward, and everyone should believe that it is possible. Another component of business planning is it helps you to set your strategic priorities for the year. So the strategic priorities are where we're going to allocate resources. So this can oftentimes be a little bit hard for people to get on the same page because you may have some in your operation that feel that perhaps land acquisition should be the priority, while others in the operation may feel that the equipment line is not going to be able to keep pace and we need to allocate funds there. So the business plan is going to be where those kind of decisions are worked out and worked through so that we don't have any disagreement about what is happening with the resources of the operation in order to get everyone to that compelling future. So when the business plan is used correctly, it's going to absolutely drive the strategic focus for all the leaders in the operation every single quarter. Now, the second component that I want to talk about today, and it may be a term that's somewhat unfamiliar to you, is that you need to have a management operating system in place. So the management operating system works in tandem with your business plan. So some of the key elements that are a part of developing a management operating system are, number 1, your accountability chart. Now, accountability chart, when someone sees it for the first time, often believes that it's an organizational chart. So it's basically showing the hierarchy of whom reports to who. Now, what the difference is, however, is that accountability chart is not just about reporting structure. It is about establishing accountability for each position in your operation so that it's very clear who is responsible for getting certain things done. The second part of a management operating system is a scorecard. So scorecards can be just a little bit tricky to develop if you're not used to working with them. But what we recommend is that your scorecard be developed with the 3 to 15 numbers that are the leading indicators for your operation. Leading indicators are really important because it helps the leadership team of the operation to establish or to identify when we might have things that are happening in the operation that are not going to help us get to our final year-end goals. And what happens when we're watching the leading indicators is that we can course correct more quickly. So it helps you identify an issue earlier rather than waiting for your lagging indicators, which are your financials. The third thing that you're going to want to consider as part of your management operating system, and I think perhaps one of the most important, is the communication structure. So we recommend that you have 3 levels of meetings. You, number 1, need to have a weekly meeting, and this is going to be operational in nature. So this is where the leadership team is getting together, discuss schedules, discuss the priorities for the week, review scorecard numbers, and also take the time to work out issues. So a lot of times, because we're moving so quickly, if we're not having the weekly meetings, issues can persist for a very long time without a resolution ever being made, because we're simply not taking the time to get the right people in the room to discuss them. The second level of meeting that you're going to want to consider is to have your quarterly strategic meetings. So your quarterly meetings are simply about reviewing how we did the previous quarter, looking at the business plan, making sure we're staying on track, and then establishing the strategic priorities for the upcoming quarter. So this is really important for most operations because it's very easy to get down inside the day-to-day activities and spend very little time actually working on your business. The third level of meeting that you're going to have is just your annual strategic planning session. So this is where we'll look at the prior year and then set the strategic priorities for the upcoming year. This is typically done in tandem with your budgeting cycle. So 3 key elements of your management operating system: your accountability chart, your scorecards, and your communication structure. The third thing that I'm going to talk about today that's often overlooked inside of succession planning is continuity plans. So the purpose of a continuity plan is to protect the operation from the big Ds, and that is death, disability, divorce, and disagreement. So we've heard that multiple times. That's a very common theme inside of succession planning discussions. However, we oftentimes don't really think about how important that is simply because we've got our attention focused somewhere else. So the location that you will find continuity plans is in 3 places. Number 1, it's going to be inside your buy-sell agreement. So buy-sell agreements are important to have in place for every single entity in your operation. So if you've got multiple LLCs or an S Corp or C Corp, you're going to want to make sure that you've got a buy-sell agreement in place for every one. Now, a couple of things about the buy-sell agreement. Number 1, I'm going to recommend that you have language inside your buy-sell agreement that addresses each one of the big Ds. The reason for that is oftentimes families find that they want to handle certain situations differently from others. For example, you may have a different consideration if someone died or if they were disabled over whether they were divorced or whether they're leaving the operation because of a disagreement. So taking the time to kind of have a conversation with your professionals about how you want to handle each one of these situations is going to be really critical to make sure that when something does happen, or if something does happen, that you are prepared as a family and you protect the operation in the way that you think is going to benefit everyone. Another place that you're going to want to review your documents for language around continuity planning is your operating agreement. If you've got LLCs or other kinds of corporations that do not have an operating agreement in place, I'm going to encourage you to update those documents, get your operating agreement in place, and make sure that it works in tandem with your buy-sell agreement. The third component that you may want to consider in terms of continuity planning is life insurance. So a couple of things about life insurance. It's a very common phenomenon when we walk into a farming operation and we start looking at what they've got in place to find that sometimes we have over-insured ourselves because life insurance is actually really an easy tool to put in place, and it's easy to get more than what we need. So if you are an operation that is heavily insured with life insurance, I'm going to encourage you as a part of your succession planning process to really evaluate that and determine if you've got enough. You may have too much. The one nice thing about life insurance, particularly if you've got young operators, is it's fairly inexpensive, but that cost does increase over time as operators get older. So you're going to want to make that a part of your annual review process, is just to take a look at that very critically and make sure that you're not overinsured when the premiums are very high. So why are these 3 components so important? So I am a huge component that succession planning must have clarity, open communication, and for most people, succession planning needs to have a certain element of certainty. So people want to know that things are going to work out the way that they expect that they will. These 3 tools are going to help to create clarity, open communication, and certainty, which is going to create a really strong structure for all the other decisions that need to get made inside of your succession plan. It's also really important that these tools are used because they ensure that family dynamics are minimized when working in and on the business. So In tying it all together, the business plan and the management operating system are the components of your succession plan that support the transition of management from one generation to another. So this is the part of the succession plan that often has a ton of frustration and disharmony attached to it. It's really easy to get things out of whack and misunderstood when those two components are not in place. The continuity plan is just there to make sure that in case something unforeseen happens, the succession plan doesn't get totally derailed and we don't have huge amounts of money flowing out of the operation at a time when we need to make sure that those resources are being directed toward the succession plan. So, if your succession planning efforts are getting stalled out or they're not going the way that you think they should be, take a look at those three components and just see where you're at, because it may be that you just need to spend a little bit more time working on those rather than some of the high-level activities that happen when we start our transition planning activities. The other thing is, that I'll say, is that there's probably a little bit of misalignment because those activities are not having a lot of attention paid to them. And so when you spend just a little bit of time focusing on them, you can get everybody into alignment, and that's going to help all of your activities be a lot more focused, keep everybody on track, and keep your family disharmony to a minimum. You may even find that you eliminate most of it by just creating platforms for open communication.